On October 21st, a Russian Su-27 fighter passed within just 10 feet of a US aircraft over the Black Sea. But this story is not really about the provocation itself. It is about the calm, chilling response from the American crew. They did not fire, react emotionally, or break formation. Instead, they relied on disciplined, secure systems and advanced technology that turned the Russian pilot's show of confidence into a serious problem in the sky. So how could a reconnaissance aircraft stand up to one of the world's most agile fighter jets, using nothing but precision, training, and data? The Black Sea is far more than a stretch of water. It is a strategic crossroads where major international shipping routes pass. Routes tied to trillions of dollars in global trade, all while sitting alongside Russia's growing geopolitical pressure. On that day, a US Navy P-8A Poseidon was carrying out a routine patrol at 10,000 feet. Its advanced sensors were scanning constantly, collecting detailed imagery of activity in the air and across the sea while operating in international airspace. The crew was not there to stir up tension. They were there to watch, document, and help maintain stability. Their mission was straightforward: monitor international airspace and protect freedom of navigation. But that routine operation changed in an instant when Russia chose to challenge the situation, not with words, but with a sudden and dangerous move from the air. The Poseidon sensor suite, one of the most advanced in service, detected a fast-moving contact closing in at high speed. It was a Sukhoi Su-27 flanker, a well-known symbol of Russian air power, launched quickly from a coastal airbase in Crimea. The jet came in aggressively, flying a direct and unmistakable path straight toward the American aircraft at more than 500 nautical miles per hour. There was no warning, no radio call on the emergency frequency, and no attempt to follow standard aviation procedure. From the very beginning, the message was clear. Then came the closest pass. The Su-27 sliced across the P-8A's flight path at a distance of only 10 feet, an astonishingly risky maneuver. Seconds later, the Russian pilot made it even more serious by performing an aggressive barrel roll directly in front of the American aircraft. That move was not just unprofessional, it created a real physical hazard. The fighter's fuselage came within 25 feet of the P-8A, close enough for the disturbed air behind it to affect the larger patrol aircraft and potentially throw it off balance. Inside the Poseidon, the data streaming across the tactical displays confirmed what the crew already understood. This was no accident. The Su-27's speed, its angle of approach, and its timing all suggested a move designed for maximum pressure and visibility. On the tactical screen, the red symbol marking the Russian jet flashed as the range dropped fast. The closing speed was extreme, 500 meters, then less. The next intercept point was only seconds away. Even so, the American crew remained steady. Through the infrared system, the pilot could see the flanker clearly, but his pulse stayed under control. That calm came from thousands of hours of training built for exactly this kind of moment, when pressure rises, options narrow, and the wrong reaction can change everything. Over the secure intercom, one key question shaped the crew's next move. Was this reckless behavior from an undisciplined pilot, or was it a carefully planned test of American resolve and response rules? The answer mattered, not just for the aircraft in that moment, but for the wider balance in the region. Russia's first tactic soon became obvious. By using simple electronic masking methods, the Su-27 aimed to blur its true movement and catch the American crew off guard, hoping they would alter course and give up control of the airspace around them. That was the first major mistake. The Russian side assumed it was dealing with a single aircraft operating alone. It was not. Nearby, a US E-3 Sentry AWACS aircraft was already on patrol at higher altitude and linked directly with the P-8A. The E-3's airborne warning and control system could track low-flying targets from roughly 250 miles away and monitor aircraft at higher altitude from even farther out. In moments, information from both aircraft was fused through a secure network, creating one shared real-time intelligence picture. That changed everything. Instead of reacting late, the Americans had already built a wide, detailed view of the situation. The Su-27's position and likely flight path had been identified while it was still about 50 nautical miles away. The element of surprise disappeared before it could even take shape. With full situational awareness, the US crew stayed composed and methodical. The P-8A's high-resolution camera system was directed to capture the entire encounter, turning Russia's dramatic maneuver from a brief event into lasting visual evidence. While the Russian side was still relying on older concepts of concealment and radar confusion, the American aircraft were operating inside a deeply connected information network where each move could be tracked, assessed, and answered almost as soon as it happened. But the pressure in the air was not over. The first Su-27 was not alone for long. On the AWACS display, 2 more Russian fighters appeared. These were more advanced Su-30S, aircraft capable of reaching around Mach 2.35, launching from the naval area near Sevastopol. They were carrying a range of stores, and their purpose seemed obvious: use speed and numbers to box in the P-8A and build a layered interception. Yet that move exposed one of Russia's biggest weaknesses. Their aircraft depended on older radar systems and lacked the level of real-time data sharing needed to operate as one fully integrated formation. In practice, that meant each pilot was still acting mostly on his own. Instead of one seamless unit, they were 3 separate aircraft trying to look like a coordinated net. The American response was immediate. From the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, positioned roughly 200 nautical miles away, 2 F/A-18E Super Hornets were launched with precise timing. They cut through the sky at around Mach 1.2, bringing with them a level of capability the Russian side could not easily match. Their AESA radars could scan across a full 360-degree environment at once, giving them a far broader and more flexible picture of the battle space. The gap in capability was impossible to ignore. The Super Hornets carried AIM-120D missiles with an engagement range of more than 100 nautical miles, well beyond the reach of Russia's top air-to-air weapons in that scenario. But range was only part of the advantage. What mattered even more was the network behind them. The American pilots were tied into the same secure data link used by the P-8A and the AWACS, which meant the Super Hornets could track the Su-27 through shared sensor data without switching on their own radar and giving away their position. At that point, this was no longer a contest between individual pilots making isolated decisions. It had become something much larger, a clash in which better coordination, stronger situational awareness, and more advanced systems turned Russia's pressure tactic into a dead end. At the same time, below the tension in the sky, the P-8A detected activity underwater. Its sonar systems picked up a Russian Kilo-class attack submarine, and that submarine carried a major limitation of its own. Its diesel-electric propulsion made it quiet underwater for a time, but to recharge the batteries that allowed silent movement, it had to run diesel engines. Those engines naturally created noise, vibration, and acoustic signatures that modern sonar could detect from long range. And there was another problem. To operate those diesel engines, the submarine needed air. That forced it closer to the surface, often in shallower water, using a snorkel. In doing so, it increased both its visibility and its acoustic footprint, turning concealment into exposure. The response beneath the surface was just as quick and controlled as the one in the air. An MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, launched from a nearby Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, arrived in the area and dropped to low altitude. From there, it began deploying a pattern of radio-acoustic buoys, better known as sonobuoys, small floating devices used in anti-submarine tracking. Each one was only a few inches wide and a few feet long, but together they formed a tight acoustic grid around the submarine's estimated position. In a matter of moments, the Russian commander, who thought he was quietly observing events, had become the one being watched. The Seahawk crew fixed on his location and held the undersea contact under constant observation. No weapons were used, yet the signal was unmistakable. The United States had visibility not only in the air, but below the surface as well. The hidden threat had been uncovered and stripped of its advantage. Then came Russia's most serious move of all, not a physical strike, but an electronic one. The lead Su-27 switched on its fire control radar and briefly locked onto the P-8A. In military aviation, that kind of lock is a direct and unmistakable warning that a launch could follow. At nearly the same moment, the fighter began transmitting basic jamming signals, a rough attempt to interfere with the American aircraft's sensors by flooding them with electronic noise. It was clearly meant as the final push, a way to apply pressure and force the U.S. crew to back away. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The moment the Russian radar energy reached the P-8A, the aircraft's electronic warfare system responded. Rather than simply absorbing the interference, it identified it, countered it, and turned the exchange back against the source. A highly controlled stream of electronic noise was directed in return, designed to overload and confuse the Russian systems. The result was immediate. On the Russian pilot's screen, the single target he had been tracking disappeared. In its place came a flood of false returns, so many that the display no longer offered a clear picture of anything real. What had been a clean intercept suddenly became a cloud of uncertainty. Radio traffic reflected the confusion. Through heavy static, the Russian pilot reported severe interference, the loss of target lock, and a screen full of false contacts. His view of the situation had effectively collapsed. At the same time, his communications were disrupted, cutting him off from the rest of the formation and leaving him isolated in the air. Unable to separate real targets from electronic decoys, the pilot had little choice but to break off and withdraw. The pressure tactic had failed. What was supposed to intimidate the American aircraft instead left the Russian side disoriented and without a reliable picture of the fight. And just as the Su-27 pilot tried to regroup and consider another pass, one more surprise appeared. A new contact suddenly showed up on his radar, positioned perfectly for an attack from only 50 nautical miles away. But it was not a fighter. Its radar signature was unfamiliar, unlike anything he had been prepared to face. Then, something appeared on the Russian pilot's radar that made the situation even more unsettling. It was the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. The aircraft had quietly flown from its base in England and had been operating over the Black Sea the entire time, remaining undetected. Its presence was not meant to start a fight. It was meant to deliver a message, a cold and unmistakable signal that the United States had maintained full awareness of the airspace from the very beginning and could respond at any moment if the situation demanded it. From roughly 80 nautical miles away, one of the FA-18E Super Hornet pilots received a new instruction. He launched an AIM-120D missile, but this missile carried no warhead. It was not meant to destroy anything. It was meant to be seen. The missile tore across the sky, its engine leaving a bright trail as it accelerated forward. Seconds later, it passed the nose of the lead Su-27 at a distance of about 200 feet. Close enough for the Russian pilot to clearly see it streak by. The shockwave rippled through the air, and the roar of the missile's flight was transmitted across the emergency radio frequency. No threats were spoken, no warning message was broadcast. Instead, the moment spoke for itself. The quiet presence of a stealth bomber combined with a perfectly controlled demonstration of power that was precise, deliberate, and non-lethal. The meaning was obvious. Withdraw immediately, or the next one will not be empty. For the Russian pilot, everything had changed. He was no longer just facing a Super Hornet with longer reach and better coordination. Now he knew that a B-2 stealth bomber, an aircraft he had not even detected, had been nearby the entire time. Continuing the confrontation was no longer a show of confidence. It would have been reckless and could have triggered a much larger crisis. The Su-27 suddenly broke away, turning sharply and abandoning any thought of continuing the encounter. Over the radio, the pilot contacted his base in a tense but controlled voice, explaining that his radar and fire control systems had experienced technical problems following the earlier electronic interference. It was a convenient explanation, Mas, one that allowed the situation to end without further escalation. In reality, the aircraft had simply been outmatched in every dimension: technology, coordination, and tactical positioning. But the American operation was not finished yet. The Super Hornets did not immediately return to the carrier. Instead, they established a protective air perimeter around the P-8A Poseidon. Calm and methodical, they continued several patrol loops while the crew aboard the AWACS aircraft monitored the radar picture. On their screens, the signals from the Russian aircraft slowly moved farther away until they shrank into tiny dots, and then disappeared entirely beyond radar range. Only then did the tension begin to ease. Afterward, the outcome spoke for itself. The American response had relied on a combination of information dominance, coordination across multiple platforms, and the steady professionalism of the crews involved. The Russian approach, built mainly on aggressive maneuvering, quickly lost its effect once it faced a tightly integrated network of aircraft and sensors. Later, Russian officials described the event as a routine training activity, a familiar attempt to downplay the incident. But the U.S. Department of Defense soon released high-resolution video and radar recordings captured by the P-8A. What had been a brief encounter over the sea became documented evidence that observers around the world could study. Each element of the attempted pressure tactic had been detected, tracked, and countered step by step. And the final demonstration, the harmless missile passing through the sky, became the unmistakable closing signal of the encounter. For Russia, it served as a costly reminder of the limits of intimidation when facing a well-coordinated and technologically advanced opponent. For the U.S. Navy crews involved, however, the mission ended much more simply. Just another patrol, another day maintaining awareness over international waters, a quiet demonstration of a basic principle that has shaped modern security. Control of the skies and seas belongs to those who combine technology, discipline, and coordination with calm precision. If you found this story interesting, share the video and subscribe so you don't miss future deep dives into military technology and real-world encounters. And tell me in the comments, which system should we break down next? The F-35, hypersonic weapons, or another military standoff? See you in the next video.